Blog Talk Radio.
You're about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Today, I think the lines are working. Yesterday, they weren't working, so we're back in business again. If you want to call in during our live broadcast, it's 646-652-4620. Today, we're pleased to have Mr. Noah Wall as our guest. He's the Director of Grassroots at FreedomWorks. He joined FreedomWorks with more than 7 years' experience fighting the GOP establishment and liberal Democrats. Boy, he got it on both ends on that one, on the federal, state, and local levels. This guy's active. During this broadcast, Noah will discuss why Lois Lerner has been called before Congress to testify concerning alleged lost emails. They're always lost. I tell you, if you ever want to go to, we should call Washington. Preston, we should call Washington Crash City.
I know.
I
mean, they're CD servers. They're always going.
You have a hard drive. It crashes only in Washington.
I have never had a hard drive crash myself.
Me neither.
Yeah,
and they never have backups because they can't afford it.
Oh, I know. You have like three backups.
$18.5 trillion deficit. They can't afford it. Okay.
And you make what, like $20 a month?
I make $20 a month.
So
and
you have three backups.
Crash. I'm doing very well. Well, she was called before Congress concerning alleged lost emails during her tenure with the IRS, when the agency is accused of illegally targeting conservative political groups, I think including the Tea Party. We'd like you to call in with your comments, your questions during the live broadcast at 646-652-4620. We look forward to hearing from you. Noah, welcome to our program.
It's great to be on today.
Thank you so much for taking your time. Now, Noah, I will plead ignorance. I know of the situation. I know little about the situation. Can you give us some background and then walk us forward so we can all be on the same page?
Sure. Well, so the situation with Lois Lerner really began in 2010. What happened was, back when the Tea Party revolution started, a lot of Tea Party activists around the country started to begin the process of creating their own groups. And so a lot of them decided that they were going to try and make tax-exempt groups with the IRS. And when all of this started happening, they started to file the paperwork with the IRS, and IRS noticed a very large increase in the number of groups on the conservative side that were being started. So somewhere around 2010, in March of 2010, IRS officials started targeting organizations with names such as Tea Party, 912, Patriot groups, and they actually started putting groups of that with those types of names into special categories. And those special categories were not, special in a good way. Effectively, they would put them in special buckets where you would, if you had those names in the name of the group, you would be forced to undergo very rigorous processes that the average person filing for these types of organizations don't have to go through. So, for example, if you were starting a Tea Party Patriot group, you would be forced to hand over the names of your donors. You would be forced to describe the role that the donors played in your organization. You were really forced to undergo an incredibly rigorous process to be able to start the groups. And if you had certain names in your group, 100% of the groups that had certain types of names went through this special process to do this. So it was it's very blatant, and it was a very serious process that resulted in many Tea Party groups actually. It's not that they were rejected, but that people actually removed themselves from the process because it was so onerous. So anyway, so this started to happen in 2010, and this happened for a couple of years. Tea Party groups began to notice. FreedomWorks got involved. When we had activists calling us saying, "Hey, we're going through this with the IRS." and actually, beginning in 2013, this whole process started to become very public. And once this all happened, the IRS began an internal investigation. It turns out that a woman named Lois Lerner was, kind of at the middle of this. And shortly after this all happened, she was placed on administrative leave because it was very serious, breaches of process and of protocol were found very soon on this process. And so in 2013, she was placed on administrative leave, and she's been brought in front of Congress a number of times, as you mentioned, before the show started. Obviously, what happened with this process was she lost her emails that were supposed to be backed up by the federal government. Funny how that happens. The reason we're hearing about Lois Lerner today was that after I'm sure, rigorous investigation by the Justice Department decided that they were not going to proceed with pressing charges against Lois Lerner. So, this whole process, it's lasted again since it started, in March of 2010 when this whole thing started to happen. But at the end of the day, the IRS has decided that they did not have enough evidence to prosecute Lois Lerner. So that's where we are right now.
Now, she was investigated by the Department of Justice, or exonerated by the Department of Justice, as well as the IRS, right? And then she was placed on leave, but it was paid leave. Now, I want paid leave. I want to do nothing, and I want to get paid for it. Now, that was her punishment. Now, this is the type of punishment I want as a taxpayer. How come I can't get that?
Well, let me give you the kicker. She's actually received. She's retired from the IRS at this point, but she's received full pension. So she receives full pension for the remainder of her days.
Oh, my goodness gracious! I'm going to take this microphone and slam it against the wall just to make myself feel better. But I don't want break your eardrums. I would suspect that there are on the liberal side, and I hate using liberal and conservative because I don't take any, I don't see much difference other than some ideology, but in the way they act. But on the liberal side, aren't there organizations similar to the Patriot organizations and the Tea Party organizations that are tax exempt?
There certainly are. And, the problem with this process was that it was blatantly partisan. So really what it was is if you had certain names, if you called your group a certain name, a certain type of group, you were placed into a special process. Now, there are liberal organizations that have been put, so in this, through this special channel of this special process. So it's not 100% of conservative groups, but it is overwhelmingly conservative groups that have been subjected to this type of treatment.
Now, if the Department of Justice and the IRS exonerated her, why are they still pursuing this?
So, well, it's not that they exonerated her. They have not exonerated her. In fact, the IRS said in the statement where they said they were not going to prosecute this, and by the way, this all happened on a Friday afternoon in the hopes that no one would notice. Whenever Washington has bad news to put out, they put it out on Friday afternoon when the reporters are planning their weekends.
It always happens that way. You know that. The Federal Reserve was voted in by Congress on the eve of Christmas Eve at 3 o'clock in the morning, with only a selected number of people there. But that's another story. But this is not a new story, I mean, this way of conducting business is very, very typical in Washington. Is that it's always very selective. But go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yes. So the Justice Department actually did not exonerate her. In fact, they said in their statement when they were declining to prosecute that she was very clearly did not manage this process well. So they stated that she did a very poor job at handling the situation. They said that I'm actually going to quote this. There was substantial evidence of mismanagement, poor judgment, and quote unquote institutional inertia that led to this whole process. So they actually slammed her pretty hard. But obviously, none of us care that the Justice Department said mean things about her. We want to see justice done, and justice is not the Justice Department saying, that she had poor judgment. Poor judgment is all well and good, but at the end of the day, when they effectively chilled free speech, by prosecuting Tea Party groups, and we don't know how many Tea Party groups were never started because they were afraid of IRS targeting them.
But so, using those words, using those words, to me, she sounds incompetent, and her punishment was retirement with full pay and benefits. Now, yes. I don't understand that. How could that happen?
It's unfortunate, and it's a reflection of how government is run today. It's something that Ayn Rand talked about quite a lot. She always thought that incompetence should be a crime. But, here in Washington, incompetence, unfortunately, in my opinion, is the norm. And, people who exhibit incompetence are not held accountable. I think that there was very clearly malice, so I don't believe that it was just incompetence, as the Justice Department said. And I know that's the opinion shared by our activists around the country. When you have emails missing, and very clearly deleted from the server, I don't think that this goes well beyond incompetence. This smacks of a very clear cover-up.
Now, but aren't all the emails, aren't they on a backup server of some sort that the operator or the initiator does not access, and that becomes a matter of permanent record?
They're supposed to. That's how the process works. And this isn't just some IT guy in the IRS, click and save. This is a very serious process that every federal agency goes through. They have processes to back up every single email, on their servers because of transparency laws that have happened over the years. So there are actually entire data centers devoted to backing up government, government email, government search history, et cetera, et cetera. So for emails to go missing is much more than her, forgetting to click save. This is a very serious thing, and we've never found a smoking gun. We've never found, okay, this person very clearly deleted the emails and is responsible for it. But we've gotten very close, and we know that there's something that went very wrong here, and we know that there was something very clearly. An effort by someone to make this not happen. These emails don't just get deleted by them. This was not a Hillary Clinton type server in her home basement.
Yeah, right.
There are vendors that are required to, to save these emails and to, go through this. So, yeah.
Yeah. To me, it's a 1,000,000 to 1 shot. And I'm being kind by saying 1,000,000 to 1 shot. I don't understand how this can ever happen, and. What I don't understand is why she should not only have been released of her duties without the pension, without any pay, without anything, but also everyone and anyone attached to this should have also been let go. What a great way to reduce the size of government, reduce our deficit, and get rid of incompetent people who are just ideologues. And yet what we do is we either promote them or we embellish them with more money and services that the average person has absolutely no access to. And people want to know why are people angry with Washington? Bingo.
Right.
And now what's going to happen as a result of this? And are there other cases of this pending at this time that you may be working on?
So to our, from what we've heard, we still believe that the IRS targeting is going on to a lesser extent to this day. We hear from activists, and we as an organization still believe that this is something that's going on. We don't believe this has been resolved. That said, there's a lot of things going on right now with regards to this, because people around the country are angry about it. This is a very clear, very specific abuse of government that not only shouldn't have happened, but it's done by an organization, the IRS, that is now entrusted with overseeing the enforcement of Obamacare. So this is an organization that has just been given a huge new set of powers, and we're seeing very clearly how they're using these powers. So this is a very big deal, and I think that it's our opinion at FreedomWorks that this is still something that's going on, and we do need to see resolved. Now, the House of Representatives currently is going through impeachment processes to they're starting the ball rolling on impeaching the IRS commissioner. Now, I don't know if you've seen some of his testimony on the Hill, but it is absolutely blatant how he has gone before Congress and said, we've done nothing wrong, and it is the quintessential Washington bureaucrat evading questions by Congress, and I can't think of a word that accurately describes how he behaves in front of Congress, and I think it's just a gross representation of how this federal bureaucracy has gotten too big, and really is kind of out of control in Washington, D.C. So at the end of the day, the House and if the House passes the articles of impeachment, then it'll move over to the Senate for the actual trial. But at the end of the day, the only way that we are going to actually see meaningful change in Washington is if we do take the White House next year with a different administration, so that we can actually go in and clean house in some of these federal agencies.
Well, I can see the Department of Injustice investigating her. I don't understand why the IRS is involved in this thing, or was involved in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, so the whole reason that the IRS is involved, and we certainly agree they shouldn't be, is the IRS oversees tax-exempt groups. So most of these groups that were being started by the IRS are tax-exempt organizations.
Okay.
Under the current scheme, the IRS says whether or not you meet the criteria to be a tax-exempt organization or not. And so that's why the IRS was involved. Now, it's the IRS. It's not just this issue. The IRS has a long history of being very partisan. There have been cases in the past where the IRS has been caught red-handed. Going basically, being an enforcer of whatever the administration is at the time. Which is very disturbing, given that the IRS is entrusted with handling our money and our taxes and funding the government. So, but yeah, I mean that's the reason that the IRS was involved. But the Department of Justice itself, needs to go through a thorough cleaning of house as well.
Yeah, about 42% of the people now consider themselves independents rather than Republicans or Democrats. And there seems to be a big move away from the established parties, and I think this was exemplified with the Donald Trump, entering the arena. And many people, if not most people, say they like Donald Trump because he's not part of the establishment. I mean, I think Donald Trump could say anything. I think he'd say, "Well, let's nuke Minneapolis," and everyone would cheer, because he's not part of the establishment. I'm only kidding, but he wouldn't say that. But I mean, he could say almost anything, and people would excuse him because he's not part of the establishment. I think we've become so accustomed to politicians on both sides of the aisle just lying, abject lying, or constantly, or telling us what we want to hear, and then going to Washington and doing exactly what they intended to do in the first place, of which they never divulge when they're running for office. And I've also been reading more and more people are considering no government whatsoever. Forget about libertarian and classical liberal and all this other stuff. I mean, people are actually saying, well, I'm so disgusted with the entire system. how about we just manage ourselves? We govern ourselves. We don't need a government at all. I mean, there's actually, it's very, very small, but it's growing exponentially in small numbers, unfortunately, you know. And there seems to be this wave away from a large central government, which smacks of the anti-federalists, you know, back in the old days, you know, when the government was first formed, saying, hey, why don't we have a consortium of states, all of which are sovereign, and then we have a central government sort of tying everyone together under the Constitution. And that sort of made a heck of a lot of sense to a lot of people, but it never occurred. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, starting with your first point about Donald Trump, I absolutely agree. And I don't think it's just Donald Trump. Yeah, I think it's also Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, and you know what it is the more against the Washington establishment you appear, the more support people seem to be getting in this race. I mean, if you add up, you know, the support by Donald Trump, support for Ben Carson, and you know Carly Fiorina, you add that in there as well, and you're getting close to 50% of the GOP electorate, very clearly very angry with what's going on, in essentially not, you know, wanting nothing to do with what's going on in Washington. So I think you're absolutely right on that. I think that it's very much a reflection of the abject lying that's going on. You know, we all remember just over a year ago in 2014, you know, the election for Congress, and you know, every Republican running for Congress, you know, U.S. House or Senate, we're all basically saying the same thing. They were saying we're going to repeal Obamacare, we're going to hold, you know, we're going to push back against the Obama administration on, you know, increasing government spending. We're going to, you know, try and limit the debt, et cetera, et cetera. They all put up a very good line. Even, and this is not just, you know, conservatives running. These are kind of across the board. They all basically said the same thing. And then they get to Washington, and boom, what's happened over the last year? It's been, you know, to say they're lying is putting it nicely. I mean, they were very clearly deceiving the American people. I mean, this is deception, and it is. They had no intention of doing anything differently than they were doing before. And you know, if you actually look at what's happened in the U.S. Senate over the last year, it's really hasn't changed all that much from when Harry Reid was in charge in the Senate. You know, there's not been all that much difference. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, people are very angry about this across the country. You know, I travel a lot for FreedomWorks and meeting with activists, and people are so fed up. You know, they just really are not particularly inclined to support a Republican just because they're a Republican. They want to see their actual track record, and I think that's a good sign, to be frank. You know, people need to learn that it's not just good enough to have an R next to your name.
Yeah. You know, the left likes to, the right likes to blame the left, you know, for the deficits, but little do they know that there's more spending done by the right than the left itself. I mean, if you add up actual dollars. And the debt limit that we were supposed to stay within, of course, we exceeded it. And both the Republicans and the Democrats and the House and the Senate are both have majority of Republicans. They both House and Senate voted to increase the debt limit, which would mean that when Obama leaves office, our current year's national debt will be close to $20 trillion. Now, but I'll bet when they run for office, they're going to say, we have to cut back spending. We can't have these liberals in office, and yet they're just as responsible. And I think slowly but surely, people are starting to see that. My problem is that we don't hear enough from the free market group. And whether you want to call them libertarians, whether you want to call them whatever, you know, free market people or whatever, those that believe in the Austrian School of Economics, fair government, the anti-federalist, they're all the same as far as I'm concerned. And I hate labels. That's the only reason why I don't use the word libertarian, because like I used to do when I was at KFAQ, I said, well, I never use libertarian because it always reminds me, you get people here in Oklahoma say, yeah, libertarians, those are those gay guys that like to dance in the street in their dirty underwear. I mean, they have no idea, no concept of what that means. Really, I used to say that all the time. I said, because you don't understand. That's the first thing that comes to your mind. But do you see any libertarians making any dent in this campaign at all?
I do, and you have to look at the Republican field kind of overall to see it. There's a number of candidates that are taking very seriously issues like pushing back against the NSA, for example. Those are things that something that FreedomWorks is pushed, and obviously sort of the more neocon branch of the Republican Party loathes our position on that. So I mean, I do definitely see a very real libertarian bent to the candidates as they're campaigning around the country. I definitely do see that. It's something that really that's very much thanks to the Tea Party, that we've seen this sort of change. It's not, I think that it's definitely changed the dynamic quite a bit since 2010. But if you look at, so you have Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul. I mean, these three senators were elected in the Tea Party wave in 2010 and 2012, and I think that because of that, we're seeing pretty good groundswell for small government principles. I definitely think we're making headway in Washington. We're not making enough headway in Washington, but if you look at 6, 8, 10 years ago, the Republican caucus was much further to the left than it is now.
Well, if all 42% of the people who consider themselves today independent vote for Rand Paul, we would be in better shape, because he is as close to being purely libertarian or free market person than anyone else in the field. I don't think anyone even comes to a close second. Do you agree with that?
Well, FreedomWorks is not endorsing for president. I mean, we have great relationships with a lot of the candidates. I definitely think that Rand Paul is, he's got a perfect voting record with FreedomWorks, or almost perfect. But that said, if you want to look at this field, so if you want to look at Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, for example, regardless of how you feel about them individually, they are so much closer to what I think libertarians and small government conservatives want to see from an elected official than what we had, say, in 2012 or 2008. I mean, try talking about liberty to, John McCain. You can have an argument, say, with Marco Rubio about, certain positions that he's had, but he at least understands our language. So, we're in a much better position, in my opinion, and in the opinion of FreedomWorks, than we have been in the past. So, that's at least a positive there.
Yeah, I suspect we may see a change in attitudes towards our politicians if we have a repeat of 2008 on steroids. My fear is that people, instead of divorcing themselves from the system, will look towards the system to be saved. And that will exacerbate the situation we have now and undo any progress that people and organizations have made toward being a free society again. And I'd like your take on that.
Well, I definitely think if we lose next year, we're going to have a really big problem on a lot of levels. And, I talk with activists around the country who tell me, and, this is not the first time I've heard this. They said that a lot of people said this: if we lose in 2012, things are over. To a lesser extent, it was said in 2008. But I do very much worry about what happens if we don't win next year, and what people's approaches will be. If we say, for the lack of a better example, if we elect Hillary Clinton, we're going to be in big trouble. If you look at the Supreme Court justices that she's going to be able to appoint, if you look at the legislation that she's going to try and push through, we have a hard time pushing back now on Republicans in Congress when Obama is, essentially a lame duck. And by the way, you mentioned they raised the debt ceiling. That's not quite accurate. They got rid of the debt ceiling.
Oh, that's right. Correct. I stand corrected. Right.
There is no debt ceiling until, for the remainder of Obama's term. We gave a liberal Democrat a blank check in his last 2 years of his political life. He has literally nothing to lose. And he can, if he can get it passed through Congress, it can get funded. So what will happen if we lose again in 2016 is we're going to see a lot of potentially disastrous things. I hope and I do believe that we're going to be able to keep fighting in any case, but it's very concerning.
Yeah,
it's very concerning what we'll see.
Noah, would you be kind enough to hold on for about 1 minute so we can take a break for station identification, and we will be right back.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Folks, don't go away. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty Talk Radio.
Folks, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and with us today we have Noah Walls. He's the director of FreedomWorks with the, and we're talking about the Lois Lerner. She was not exonerated, but she was actually rewarded, for her actions. And the way I look at it, unfortunately, that's not the right words, but she is now retired and on full pension and everything and all her benefits after refusing. Now, she has refused to testify, right? She refused to show up to testify in front of Congress. Am I correct?
She pled the fifth, yes.
Yeah. Now, when she did that, was she subpoenaed to show up or go to jail, or where does that stand?
She was subpoenaed to show up. She did show up, but she pled the fifth. So, she essentially said that she refused to incriminate herself by testifying. So, you don't typically do that when you're innocent. But that is her constitutional right to, decline to. She is allowed to not incriminate herself, but that said, it is not. That's pretty damning.
Yeah, you can imagine if my wife came up to me and said, "Are you cheating on me?" I say, "Well, honey, anything I say may incriminate me."
Right.
I mean, what is my wife's going to think?
Yeah,
she'll say, "Oh, geez, I feel so much better, dear. Thank you so much. You're such a loving husband."
Right.
It's so insane. Everything we do is insane. It just drives me nuts. Hold up. Our board operator, Preston, here has a question.
Yeah, well, so, like you guys were just talking about. I mean, this lady, she pleads the fifth. She's obviously done something wrong. She's obviously done something criminal. And as a taxpayer, I'm paying her pension now. I'm paying her to be retired. And not only should she have been fired without any of those benefits, she should have been. I mean, that's a criminal. It's a criminal act she committed. She should have gone to trial. I mean, things should have come out, and she should have maybe served jail time. And I, as a taxpayer, am now paying for her pension. How can that happen?
Well, it's worse than that. From my understanding, from reading about her in particular, she's married to an attorney. She lives in a $2.5 million house in Bethesda, Maryland, a very posh suburb. I have a hard time understanding how this is possible, but the number I've read is that her pension is almost $100,000 a year. I don't even understand how that's. I want that. I want to figure out that career path.
Because Joe's not going to pay me that kind of pension.
It's outrageous on every level.
Well, and people are rightfully angry. The average, the average person is in worse financial condition today than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 and 30 years ago. People are struggling more today than ever. There are, 40-50% of the children now are on food stamps. I think it's even higher than that now, 70% on food stamps. I mean, people are struggling overall. Now, there's some people who are doing very well, but the vast majority of people are in worse shape today financially than ever. And you don't have to be an economist to know this. All you have to do is watch the boob tube. And when you hear things like, oh, want to buy a car? You have no money? No problem. No payments till next year. You know everyone's broke, or else they wouldn't be doing that. So when someone is accused of something and they refuse to testify, that should put them in jail. I mean, the Fifth Amendment, right in jail, then in this case at least. But yet they get rewarded for lying. They get rewarded for leaving the job, for being fired, and they live in abject, in luxury rather. How is the average American person? They are angry. This makes them angry. This is one of a million things that are going on that makes people angry. So how are we going to keep this country together when there are so many angry people? And I'm one of them, by the way.
Me too.
Oh, and Preston's just joined the crowd. All right, and there's so many angry people. We have an election of which a minority of people are voting. What I like to see is an election where one party gets 5 votes, the other party gets 3 votes, and the 5 votes of the 3, and everyone else stays home. I would love to see that and say, well, I have the majority of the votes. I'm president of the United States. I got all 5 votes. That's what I'd love to see. But people are so darn angry because of what is going on in Washington, and everyone goes to Washington and says, I'm going to clean the place up. And it gets worse. How do we get out of this tumbler? I mean, we're constantly turning around and doing the same thing. How do we get out of this, Noah?
So there's a few rays of hope I would that I'll put through that we can talk about. The first is the House Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives. This is a group of about 40 representatives that are actually dedicated to cleaning up Washington. These are a group of people, names I'm sure you'll recognize: Justin Amash, Dave Bratt in Virginia, who beat Eric Cantor last year, Thomas Massey. These are very, very strong, conservative, and really with a very libertarian bent, frankly. Jim Bridenstine, actually, from your state, who's done a tremendous job. These are guys who are actually in there that are actually fighting for policy reform and actually looking to change things in Washington. They're not, certainly not a perfect group. They haven't done a perfect job. They're very new. But they only started back in February. But this is a group that wouldn't even conceivably exist 6 to 8 years ago. These are new liberty-minded representatives that have come up in the Tea Party wave that are in Congress to change things. Now, these guys are put through an awful lot because of their stand for liberty. I mean, they are persecuted effectively by House leadership. They're cut off from fundraising in Washington, D.C. The Chamber of Commerce is talking about spending $100 million to defeat these individuals. So you have to look at this. There are some rays of hope. There are members in Washington, and the Liberty Caucus in Washington is growing. And this is not a shrinking movement. This is a growing movement. So that's very good. We have excellent members of the Senate. When even 6 to 8 years ago we had really no good members of the U.S. Senate. But now we have Mike Lee. We have Ted Cruz, et cetera, who are very much in Washington to fight for liberty. So I think that there are positive movements happening where 6 to 8 years ago we would never have seen this type of thing going on. So also if you look at the presidential race, you look at the type of people who are running. These are not necessarily the career politicians that we've put up for the Republican Party. In 2012 and 2008. These are very different types of people. And if you look at the establishment candidates, the Jeb Bushes, they're not doing well. Despite the fact that he raised over $100 million so far for his campaign, he's barely registering in the polls. I think that speaks well to, we're certainly not out of the woods. I mean, we have an awful lot to do. But there is some progress being made.
How did the debt limit get eliminated then? I mean, if we have this wave towards individual freedom, smaller government, lower debt, how did this thing get swept?
Sure.
How did that happen? I mean, that wasn't even close.
You're right. At the end of the day, this was the parting gift of John Boehner. John Boehner obviously. He said he was going to resign back in September. He did that because he was going to get ousted. He didn't do that because he was wanting to be a nice guy. He did that because the Freedom Caucus announced that they were going to challenge him, and they had the votes to beat him. So I think that that was his parting gift. That was his last bill that he ushered through as Speaker. And it actually passed with Democrat votes. Republicans obviously have the majority in the House, but 2/3. So I think there's 240 Republicans in the House of Representatives, thereabouts. 160 Republicans, so 2/3, voted against this budget deal. And only about 80 Republicans voted for it. So it was 80 Republicans and the rest of Democrats. Obviously, Democrats are always going to vote to increase the debt ceiling. And they love the fact that there isn't one for the next 2 years. I mean, that's how they think we should govern permanently. But, I mean, that's effectively how it happened. It passed with 100% of Democrats voting for it. And, there's about 80 liberal members of the Republican caucus who, I think are poor excuses for Republicans. They give us a very bad name. But, that's how it passed with a majority of 100% of Democrats and about a small minority of Republicans voting for it.
Well, the only congressman that I had truly total respect for was Ron Paul, because he was truly a man of principle. If they gave him 110 pages of legalese on a particular subject, and he had to vote on it the next morning, it was very easy for him. He voted no. He said, you don't give me something that I can't understand, I can't read, I have no idea what it is, I don't know what the implications are, and ask me to vote on it. So the answer is no. And he would be a lone wolf here. And he was very consistent, and that's why they called him Dr. No. And I had a tremendous amount of respect for him. I met him when I was in Austin. Thank you. I don't know why I can't remember that. Austin, Texas. Anyway, my wife and I drove down to Austin, Texas to the conference where he was speaking, and a tremendous amount of respect for the man. But you would think there would be more Ron Pauls. I mean, not just one, but there would be a plethora of Ron Pauls. Maybe not a majority, but a lot of them. But there are so few, although they seem to be conservative, they seem to be libertarian, they seem to be small government people. You know, when push comes to shove, they all have their own little favorites where they vote. So they contaminate every single vote. Sometimes they vote yes, and sometimes they vote no, depending on the situation. With Ron Paul, it was always no, very simple. And you knew exactly where he stood on everything. I don't know how we get out of this malaise. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think that we don't need every member of the House to be perfect on every issue. What we need is a large group of people who are with us in the vast majority of situations. So we have right now about 40 members that vote right on most issues in this House Freedom Caucus. If we can get that up to 60, 70 members, then we are at a position where we can stop these types of horrible, bad legislation. I think that, however, we do need a conservative, liberty-minded president to be able to get us back from this. We're in a position right now in the House where, and I'm not defending the House Republican Caucus, believe me, but we do need we need a liberty-minded president so that we can actually. It's all well and good to block legislation, but we need to be able to pass reforms that fix what's going on. And right now we have a president that will just never sign that type of legislation.
Yeah, the problem that I have is that in order to get into office today, you need big bucks. There's estimates of up to $2 billion to become president of the United States. Well, quite frankly, I'm not going to give that money. And the average person doesn't have any money. They can't even give money to charity because they're on charity. They're taking in money from charity. So the people with the money are buying the politicians. They're buying they're financing their campaigns. So when they get into office, they can't vote no because they'd be voting for someone who just gave them $200,000 or $2 million or whatever the case may be. So it seems that the whole system is so corrupt. You have to be corrupt in order to win. And it's a very, very rare when you're not. So how do these people, from a pragmatic point of view, they win an election and people have given them very, very large sums of money, all of whom want something back in return, and they get into office, and then all of a sudden they wipe the slate clean and basically diss all the people that have paid them the big money. Whether it be the PACs, whether it be certain industry and whatever. How do they do that? And it seems to be corrupt at the core. So you can get good talk, but you can't get good action once a person is in office. And I don't see that changing short of basically a revolution of some sort. And when I say revolution, I don't mean people in the street with guns or anything like that, but a total revolution of the mind, I guess, or a revelation where people start thinking totally differently, which I don't expect ever would happen.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's very hard to take large sums of money from someone and then turn around and say no to them. But that's what we need in Washington. I mean, I don't see in the foreseeable future the process changing. Now, we at FreedomWorks, we have a PAC and Super PAC. We're by far not one of the larger organizations in Washington, D.C. But that said, what we're trying to do right now is actually, we're out there trying to raise money directly for these members of the House who are doing the right thing. And, so we're actually trying to help correct that process, because you're right. The chambers of commerce, these large corporations are always going to have more money than we do. And, they're going to always go out there and try and influence politicians to, advance legislation that is specifically beneficial to them. But if we can go out and actually create essentially a stream of donations to these individuals directly, I do believe that can have an impact. Because I particularly in House Freedom Caucus, but in Congress in general, I think most members actually want to do the right thing. they just make it very hard in Washington, D.C. to do the right thing. I mean, it is incredible how from the minute you get elected, the screws that they put to you to really force you to vote for these types of bills that these special interests want. It's very tough to get these guys to do the right thing. But and that's why we at FreedomWorks are taking this approach of directly trying to fund some of these liberty candidates so that they can, frankly, have the cash to get reelected and do the right thing.
Are there any members of the Libertarian Caucus or Libertarian Party or whatever that will be running for office, that will be announced soon, that you think has a hope and a prayer and is more consistent with FreedomWorks?
Yeah, there's a lot of candidates right now that a number of candidates right now that we're supporting. We're actually trying to, it's kind of unique for us, we're actually on the defensive on this election cycle. We need to make sure that candidates like Dave Bratt in Virginia, who won in one election last year when he beat Eric Cantor. We need to make sure that he is able to get reelected and not challenged. We need to make sure that he has the resources to do that. We're working with Tim Huelskamp in Kansas. He is a farmer who votes against farm bills in Kansas.
I love it. I love it. I love this guy already. It's amazing.
Yeah, and let me give you a little anecdote with him. He's a farmer by trade. I think he has a PhD in some agricultural field. They will not let him on the agricultural committee in Congress. He represents Kansas, a farming state. They won't let him on the ag committee because he votes against the farm bill. That's the type of people that we need to support, and so he's actually actively being challenged by the Chamber of Commerce. So we are already up on TV in his district helping him out. We're working to support Thomas Massey in Kentucky. He's another one. He's an engineer by trade. Got elected to Congress in rural Kentucky. We need to make. He is one of those very special congressmen who actively, he was the person who really ginned up the whole idea to fight against, to oust Boehner. He was the person who, said, I've had enough. We're going to get rid of John Boehner. And he's the one who helped push that through. Now, obviously, we would have preferred a more conservative alternative to Paul Ryan, but he's the type of person that has the courage to actually go through and implement these things. So there are a lot of candidates out there that FreedomWorks is supporting, and those are 3 examples.
Anyone running for president that's a libertarian that you know of?
You very well know that Rand Paul's running.
Yeah. He calls himself a conservative, and only because of 1 or 2 issues. And I often wonder if he says that just so that he can keep his Republican label, so that he's not considered a libertarian, so that he at least stands a chance of winning. I often wonder whether or not if he's being a little disingenuous when he calls himself a conservative, and I'm not really sure. Yeah,
I think we're spoiled for choice for candidates that are infinitely better than we've seen in the past. Right. When you look at any of the candidates who are in the top 5 right now versus Mitt Romney, it's not even a question.
Right.
So we don't have the perfect candidate this cycle. Who knows? Maybe we'll have one next time. But I think at this point, we have some great options to choose from.
Yeah. Have you heard anyone from the Libertarian Party announce that they want to be a candidate for president?
I haven't. FreedomWorks, we focus our political efforts within the Republican Party because we think that's the best way to achieve success. And we work on moving the Republicans, in a liberty direction. I think I have not specifically heard about that, but, I certainly hope that they put up a good candidate as well.
Where does FreedomWorks part company with the Libertarian Party, and what issues?
I don't think it's about issues. I think it's about practicality. Right now this is a 2-party system, for better or for worse, and FreedomWorks, we work on being effective, and we want to make sure that the support of our activists goes towards candidates that have a good chance and likelihood of winning. So I mean, that's our reason for working within the Republican Party framework. I do think the Republican Party can be saved from itself, but it's going to take a lot of work of us pushing out this consultant class that has absolutely destroyed the core of the Republican Party.
Yeah. Would you be pleased if a Rand Paul became president?
Certainly. I mean, look.
Okay. I'd
also be pleased if we had again, look at the top 5 candidates. Look at their positions on the issues, and we're leaps. I don't know if you heard. I'm going to just throw this in there, but Mitt Romney the other day, in a op-ed that he wrote, was just the other day, took credit for Obamacare, saying that he was the work that he did in Massachusetts resulted in Obamacare, and he said this in a very, he was showing off about how the work that he did created the Obamacare framework, and he talked about how great it was that we've removed all these people from being uninsured. That's the type of person that Mitt Romney was. He ran an entire campaign against Obamacare, saying how awful it was because he wanted our vote. Now he's off showing off about how he was responsible for it.
Yeah, I mean Obamacare happens to result in a total disaster to everyone, especially the poor.
But I mean, look at that. What type of person do you have to be to spend close to $1 billion opposing Obamacare, in his presidential campaign, and then 2 years later come out and take credit for it in a positive way and say, this is something that I was proud to help promote? That's the type of person that he was, and that's the reason that that's the reason he lost, and that's the reason that we need to move in a different direction as a movement.
Yeah, well, George Orwell called that back in his book 1984, where they say one thing, mean another, and then they reverse all the words around, and you're convinced that's exactly what they said in the first place, and it's the exact opposite, and everyone believes it. One last question, and I know this is going to be an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In the event of a serious economic downturn, many economists feel that we are due for one simply because of the world. The world is in an economic deflation and heading for a depression. Prices of everything is going down. There are more goods available than there is money to buy them. There's money printing. There's negative interest rates in Europe. We may go that route, which is tantamount to total economic insanity. I mean, any economist worth their salt will tell you that. It's never worked. Japan's debt to GDP is something like 250% of GDP, et cetera. I can go on for an hour. We're heading in that direction. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to escape some sort of economic, and I don't know what to call it, but it could be anything from a slowdown, a mini depression, a recession, to Armageddon, somewhere along the line. But people are going to suffer. The average person is going to lose out, except for that 0.1% who will make on the deal, as they always do. What do you think politically will change if something like that would happen?
I think that we'll be forced, and I think that regardless if this happens now or this happens 20 years from now, we're going to be forced at some point to move away from the largesse of the welfare state that we have now. That's going to happen. And anyone who tells you that it's not going to happen doesn't understand numbers and math. This is going to happen because we cannot afford to be increasing. Just the other day, after they increased the debt ceiling, our national debt increased by $350 billion overnight. That's overnight. We cannot afford this, and that's the thing about when I talk with when I'm talking with liberals is what the policies that they advocate and the policies that they push. I don't agree with them, but you don't even have to agree with them or not. We simply cannot afford them. And we're going to, whether it's now, 20 years from now, we're going to be put in a position where we're just not going to be able to continue to pay for them. So it is a fact, and that is going to happen. And when that happens, we're going to need to make some very serious decisions about how we govern going forward. And I think that that's what we'll see change.
Okay, great. Noah, I want to thank you very much for being on our program. I want to give you the last 30 seconds to wrap things up, if you will, or tell people how they can contact you and about your organization.
Sure. No, we at FreedomWorks, we're a national grassroots organization that exists to advance free market principles and and liberty-minded values in Washington, D.C. We make it very easy to get involved at FreedomWorks. So you just go to freedomworks.org and you can sign up to get involved today.
Okay. Noah, you've been a terrific guest. Thank you so much, and I hope you will accept our invitation to return at a later date.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. We'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends. Let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you are either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.